The strange thing about this coffee is it tastes good, but it's not that distinguished, different flavor from the last one that I'm currently buying. I bought these crackers, they're called cantuccini from Gourmet Finest Cuisine at the shop while I was shopping for this coffee as well. And they have this little distinguished flavor of cappuccino. The taste is not there, but the smell is amazing. Okay, so I have this new type of videos for you. Learn Thursday, Teach Tuesday. It's basically process information that I learned at Thursday and then I teaching Tuesday. So let's keep it short and keep it accurate. I have prepared some footage that I recorded a little bit earlier. And it's about the shutter speed. You see there is this American style when you're shooting 60 frames per second, and there is a European style when we are shooting 50 frames per second. And then we have 25, they have 30, it's almost the same thing. 25 frames per second of a video, or you are getting 50 or 60 frames per second in the video. So this second is divided into 25 frames or into 50 frames. If you want to get cinematic look, you are shooting 25 frames per second. But why we are shooting at more frames, that's why when you want to get a slow motion, when you have a lot of these frames, you recorded that at 120 frames per second, and you increase that second to a 5 second. If you want to get that really smooth, nice slow motion, you have to increase the frames per second into 120 frames per second, 240, but that we are talking about very expensive cameras. Or your phone also to do really high frames per second, but that's by sacrificing the quality of the video. See, my phone can record 240 frames per second, but the quality of a video will be HD, not even a full HD. So it's sacrificing the power of the sensor so it can capture more frames per second. If you want not to really spend money on cameras that can record 120 frames per second, look at your phone and look at the settings. If you can push the frames per second to a higher numbers, maybe sometimes it will tell you that you have to decrease the resolution of the video you are taking. The more frames per second you are getting, the more hasty has the camera react, and that means that less light is reaching the sensor behind the lens. That's why you need more light within the scene so you can capture in a much faster frames per second ratio. But that also means that if you are capturing at really high speeds, the LED lights are working at not at a constant power, but they are flickering. But they are flickering so fast that our eyes cannot perceive the speed of the light. It's really a difference between the lights. So that's why if you want to shoot a scene with a really high frame rate and then slow it down, just go outside and use regular sunlight. If you are really looking for lights, artificial lights that are capable of shooting at really high frame rates, just ask the customer service or read the description, because not every light can be used in the scenes that are being slowed down in the post process. And now we're getting to shutter speed. That's frames per second and a shutter speed. You know shutter speed from taking pictures, but a frames per second is really a thing of a video. And now you have to combine these two things. So if you are using 25 frames per second, you basically have to use this rule of thumb and double it, and that's your shutter speed. So 50th of a shutter speed. If you are using 50 frames per second, that way you are using 100th of a shutter speed, and you can go on with that. Why we have to use this double measure of a frames per second times 2, that's your shutter speed. Let's look at the examples. I recorded a little bit earlier clips of my wheel from a bike. and I use different combinations of frames per second and the shutter speed. So we can, on the example, see how is the different shutter speed affecting frames per second. From a regular speed, you can see on the braking pad effect when you are seeing that it's spinning in the other way, but in the footage with 25th of a shutter speed, you cannot see that occurring. Next up, we have 50 frames per second, two videos. One has 50th of a shutter speed and second one has a 100th of a shutter speed. So again, in these two videos, you cannot really perceive the differences in between them. But let's watch these clips in a slow motion so we can really decipher what's happening with the slower and the faster shutter speed using the same frames per second ratio.
Okay, so basically what I did here is I broke untold rule of slowing down 25 FPS video, but what you're supposed to see here is that video with a less shutter speed is much more blurred out than the one with the correct amount of shutter speed. With a faster frame rate, there goes the same rule that you use a double amount of FPS and you are getting your shutter speed. But basically you will use faster frame rate only if you are slowing down the video in a post process, not when you want to get 25 frames per second. You will not record 50 frames per second and then slow it down to 25 because it will look unnatural. Basically, if you want to get that cinematic look, shoot at the 25 frames per second and double the amount of shutter speed and you will get the exact nice picture that you wanted in the beginning. And here you can see how it looks comparison to the 25 frames per second. You can see that you are not supposed to slow down 25 FPS because it will look crazy bad. Basically, if you want to get that cinematic look, do yourself a favor and use correct amount of shutter speed.
Okay, so just remember, if you are recording at 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second, or doesn't matter, double the number and you are getting your shutter speed. Keep that in mind and you will be cinematic filmer in no time. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe down, like it and comment. It's new part of the series of Teaching Tuesday. I'm doing this new schema of learn one, do one, teach one. And until I see you next time, stay creative.